IVM.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of episode 200 of Simplify.
Why do I feel we've been here before?
I think you should call it the final
right?
part, not part 2.
Yeah.
Final part.
Final part,
It's a lot better.
Just to be clear, next week's episode is likely to be 152, just to assuage fans. So we are continuing our celebration of the 200th episode of this wonderful show, and I think let's get
Storied podcast.
Yeah.
storied podcast.
Just think of it as a coconut which is broken in 2 parts, and
Yes.
this is the second one.
Yeah. And a lot of the bad negative stuff has gone into a glass of butter. Yeah.
But let's get a little nostalgic, Naren. It was at your house that we started this show 4 years back, 4 or 5 years back. With,
4 or 5 years ago.
nothing more than a mobile phone, and as we famously say, Naren, our idea of audio engineering then was to switch off the fan.
Yeah. And it was entirely the indefatigable energy of Chuck which started it.
You're
I
too
would say
much.
that.
And no, I just
He
want to
would.
stop. I just want to stop Tony before he says some rubbish like we are still stopping all our fans. So
Yeah.
Tony, I anticipated that. I knew that mischief I could see in your eyes. So I just wanted to
See, Das, such a veteran you've become.
I just wanted to
I one true fan.
I just wanted to nip that
Please don't turn
in
yourself
the
off.
bud, and then of course Shriketh came on
Yeah.
as the guest that started as guest, continued as.
Hey.
It's like how I think
The British.
I was thinking more agency-client relationship, but this the British is another good way.
British.
So then, what are you? So okay, fair enough. If Naren and I were peasants or whatever,
Yeah.
back then, and then Shriketh came in and educated us with the railways and English
Yeah.
education and cricket.
I was the Lagana auntie.
You are the auntie.
I am the bureaucrat.
Yeah.
After
UPSC
independence.
toppers. We are the UPSC
Does
toppers.
very little work, but acts all important and also.
You are-
Like that.
So you are
Yeah.
Humphrey.
Yeah, he's the
Yeah,
cartel
correct.
accountant.
Okay.
Okay, so a quick recap. We were talking about SPACs in the last episode, and then Shriketh spoke about memification of the stock
Memification
market
of
and
stock market,
stock
yeah.
investing and the entire GameStop, GameStop circus. Now it's Chuck's turn to come up with whatever he has planned. On to you, Chuck.
Yay, thank you. So I want to rant or talk about big tech.
Hmm.
I think it's a big enough topic for all of us.
Always a fertile area.
Yeah, it's a big enough topic for all of us to tech about. I could have started that slightly better. I know. I'm sorry. No. So,
Yeah.
so
This reminds me of Dave Brubeck's immortal song Tech 5.
No, at this point, we're basically like, take it and go. Like, this is
Yeah.
all you get.
another line that sounds a little familiar. But anyway, so big tech, what is big tech? Firstly, it's worth asking that question right up top. Usually when we say big tech, it refers to the big 4 or 5 companies that dominate our lives for better or worse from a internet point of view, that being Google, Facebook, and of course that obviously includes Instagram and WhatsApp as well as part of it. Then there is Apple to some extent, at least in the US. What else would count? Microsoft, I guess. I feel I've missed somebody out. Amazon, of course.
Amazon.
Amazon.
So
Amazon.
it's basically what's on your phone and you use most of the time, right?
Most of the
time,
Is
yeah.
the origin of the phrase, is that a big tech in your pants, or are you just happy to see me?
So there's this fascinating. So it's actually kind of incredible to see how these companies that were just formed about 20 years ago, most of them, which was just formed about 20 or so years ago, have not just dominated to connect it back to the previous episode, kind of taken over stock market valuations and stuff as well. And big tech has got even bigger during the pandemic. Something we'll talk
Like
about.
Manchester City.
No, Like, wow, punches are coming from everywhere. Is there something called big football? Anyway, we'll talk about that. No, so in 2008,
It's called American football.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
nothing called American football. It's just rugby. Anyway,
Big football is we are yeti to talk about it. Okay. Big foot. No, go on.
Oh dear.
No, American football does look like it's been played with big football. So that does work.
Apparently, the foot in football refers to the size of the ball. I did not know this.
Ah.
Oh, it's a foot long.
1 foot. Yeah, apparently, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Profound.
Profound, no? Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Kind of now makes sense if you think about it. Like,
But
say
is this a
that
fact
now.
or like has this been verified or? It's like-
I don't know. I read it on the internet, so it must be true.
It must be
Ah,
true. It
then
must
it's
be.
true.
So there was this a journalist from Gizmodo, I think, in 2-3 years back, someone called Kashmir Hill. I think she writes for NYT now. So she did this experiment where she went, a 5-week experiment where she went 1 week without each of the big four guys. That's Facebook, Google, Amazon, and non-Microsoft, the other four guys. And then the 5th week, she went without any of them. Now, what is interesting over there is when we think of Facebook, we think of just, Facebook and to some extent Instagram, I guess. And when we think of Amazon, we think of only the e-commerce websites. Can you go a week without Amazon? Yeah, sure, that's okay. But then you think about what all tentacles Amazon has its hands into, like Amazon Web Services, for example, which is the fastest growing. It's it's now its second fastest growing division. Actually, the ads business is the fastest growing business right now.
Yeah, but AWS is their money-making division.
Yeah, AWS is the money-making division, which has in some ways bankrolled the less profitable retail business, which is what you and I associate. And she said, and because of this, and similarly, like Google as well, we think of Google mainly as the search engine, but it's obviously a lot more than that right now. Because if you say you can't use Google, it also means that you have no Google Maps to navigate. Probably doesn't make a difference for us at home right now, where the challenge is to find the biggest challenge is to find the toilet. But back in the days when we could go out, that must have been quite a challenge. And then that's when it really hit her and her readers that when you cut out one of these players, you are crippled in many ways that you didn't see. And hence, look at the amount of control that they actually have over our lives. And this has had a whole bunch of other downstream effects as well, if that's the right phrase to use. We think that we live in a technological boom right now, but if you look at the numbers, there are actually fewer companies started in Silicon Valley over the last 4 or 5 years than in the 80s. And that's because founders are actually scared to start companies thinking that one of these guys will just copy over the features. And that kind of makes sense, right? Look at the precedent. Like Snapchat had a good idea, boom, it suddenly became Instagram stories. There's a joke that Instagram is actually Facebook's R&D lab. That Snapchat is Facebook's R&D lab. And there are many...
But can I just say one thing as someone who's worked on the advertising angle? One thing that made me incredibly happy was like 2-3 years after I started advertising on Facebook, Snapchat is not as robust, but finally one agency provided the dashboard, and their advertising dashboard is completely copied over from Facebook's advertising dashboard. So I'm like, okay, good.
Wow.
I guess that's one way of fighting back. Amazing. And what's fascinating for me, and right now there's a lot of we're talking about big tech because it's a news thing, right? There's big tech antitrust, and all these guys being hauled over to Congress to testify and all that. What's interesting to me is all of them are different. All of them operate in completely different spaces. They're kind of stepping on each other's toes, but it's almost like this, all right, we big 4 or 5 guys are in this together in our own completely different sort of things. Like Google dominates some things, Facebook and Instagram dominate like social networking and things like that. Amazon is completely online retail. And Apple's always kind of like been the outlier in some sense. And I guess that's because they have a completely different model where their whole thing is they have such a strong brand that people are willing to pay them a lot of money for products. So they are kind of slightly different from the rest of big tech.
Yeah. Imagine a big four that doesn't have Microsoft in it, right? It's like when suddenly you say the big four of football is United City, Arsenal, and Chelsea, and like Liverpool is somewhere else.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Blackburn won once So
once. yeah. But no, this is almost like, the whole, Italian cartel kind of business that I take the north side, you take the west side, I'll take the east side, and you take the south side type of thing. And also then later on seen in the Cola Wars where the biggest loser of the Cola Wars was RC Cola, right? Where you're at the end of the day, when I'm making one or the other the option, then there is no third option that can come in.
And the other big loser of the Cola Wars being livers around the world, but that's another story. But across the board, these players, the way they operate and the way they're kind of doing it, and there was a very interesting point you said about the whole lacking innovation, where now there is also a huge number of new innovators who are coming in with the sole objective of selling their idea to these big four. They are designing entrepreneurial ideas to sell it to a company. Because
is that a bad thing? I mean, it's much better than like making up fake valuations and like getting
absolutely.
sold.
There are pros and cons, but the one thing that does come out is that every entrepreneur that comes up with the idea that I'm going to sell to Amazon is increasing the valuation of Amazon, not just from the fact that they're going to sell them their innovation, but also from the perspective that there is no way I'm going to consider competing with Amazon.
Yeah, right? But I'm saying it's a safer option, right? Like, I mean, historically, and I guess Naren would be best placed to say this. Anyway, like 95% of startups or companies that get started fail in the first 2 years or so, right? So it's better to have an insurance policy saying I have an option of like, either wanting to go for the long term or selling out to Amazon or getting into like an investor's kitty as one of the 20 bets that he places, right? So I think it's better than what was
end of the day, you do need money, right? You can't go to your grocer and say, I got a great idea, give me some.
Would you like to invest in my SPAC in exchange for tomato 1 kilo?
But if you look at it from an individual point of view, definitely I agree with you, Tony, that it is better for that person to have a certain guarantee of success rather than that whole 90% failure rate thing. But from a larger market and innovation point of view, that 90% failure was what was actually almost the hotbed of innovation, right? That 90% failure rate was that very strong sieve of people coming up, and also the people who were failing to try to get into the 10% in their second try or third try or 10th try or whatever. Fair. Right. So it depends on the viewpoint of who it is better for. I mean, you're looking at an individual, I have a better success rate and I'm more financially secure. But here I'm designing an innovation to make AWS better rather than designing an innovation to how do I make the consumer's life better. I'm looking at ways I can make AWS or any tech innovations better. Specifically, I'm tailoring my innovation to improve their larger innovation. So that's where I feel there might be a problematic area of a brand new thinking coming through because of how prohibitively large these tech giants are.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's actually one of the last things that I wanted to mention, but since you brought it up right now.
Oh, no, sorry.
Go ahead. No, that's okay. That's okay. So like, it seems like these big 4-5 players, and honestly, we say big tech, it doesn't necessarily refer to just these 4 or 5 players, right? You see it in other spaces as well. It's basically like in every sector of technology you take, there are 1 or 2 huge winners, and then it's almost impossible for everybody else to kind of compete. Take music, for instance, where it's very clearly a Spotify or an Apple Music or whatever else who's kind of cornering that. And they, because of that scale, because of that reach, now they're able to innovate, and hence I don't know, I guess investors call this the flywheel effect or something, where, now Spotify is now able to get podcasts, as a result of which the gulf between them and whoever else is gets widened. And take something else.
But for the average podcaster, it's a huge opportunity, right? Like now you can be featured along with Michelle Obama's podcast.
No, but then then you have the same problem of discoverability then, right? Like
correct.
Become one podcast among 1,000, and just like the same problem is there on Amazon as well. And just to a couple more examples on the earlier point itself, like take B2B software, for instance, where Salesforce was big and it's getting bigger now. Not a criticism as such. Many of these companies are very good and all that, but it does put them in a position to dictate terms to some extent. Like artists, for instance, are pissed off at Spotify for not paying them enough, and merchants on Amazon are constantly complaining that it's always like a two-edged sword, right? Like you get a lot of reach to some extent, but you don't end up owning the customer. You have to pay a shit ton of money to Amazon, and of course, Amazon can take all the data, mine it, and create their own free basic. Not free basics. What the Amazon basics, free basics.
Yeah.
Amazon
No, but can I just say, like,
where my mind went.
One of the things that you've done, which inspired me to do it later, is that we've pirated a lot of music or software over a long period of time, right? And when we made enough money, you were good enough to go back and like buy the physical copies or whatever to pay them back. And I actually like used a pirated crossword software for 4 years. Till I stopped making crosswords and I started making enough money. So then I went back and bought it for 10,000 rupees. But like, unless the ecosystem exists, right? Like it's not possible for the person lower down the stream to actually make money. So I think like there are both sides to it. One of the things that I see playing out is that everyone when they start off, they're like, they're idealistic. So Google starts with "Don't be evil," and Facebook is like,
those were the days.
And then like when you become successful, suddenly your whole operation changes from what can we do new to how do we protect what we have. And the moment the legal team in a company becomes the most important department, I think it stops becoming cool.
Actually, when we talk about evils of big tech, it's impossible to not talk about gig workers. So in some sense, the most egregious, if I may use that term, of all these players are companies like, say, an Uber or a DoorDash or whatever, right? Where you have you have lots of reports of. So in all these companies, so the end consumer ends up pretty happy if you think about it to some extent, right? We get a lot of services for free or discounted, or we can like at night at 12 p.m. on a whim, we can decide to order a pizza and half an hour later it's over there. But somebody is paying for it somewhere, right? And that tends to be some sort of workers. Now there's one strain of thought that says, all right, but at least now these guys have an additional, have some sort of additional income. But I think I don't know, the system seems to have been rigged against them in some ways, and I guess it's good to see regularly, like in the UK recently, they ruled that all Uber drivers have to be classified as workers instead of gig workers. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing overall, but I think unless you make the whole thing sustainable for everybody, especially the people who run the rails, I don't think. Not just the people who own the rails, but people who actually, keep the vehicle running on the rails.
I agree with you, but here's the slight counter, right? And I absolutely think like they're being terrible to workers. But I'm just saying that it's easier to be a left-leaning liberal in Mumbai than it is in Kerala, where I'm now glad that like Amazon has finally started delivering, right? Like 2 years ago, it was like they would call you after 5 days of your complaint and say, hey, a parcel has come for you. When are you coming to our office to collect it? So I'm just saying like, it's much easier to be a left liberal when I was in Mumbai than.
Well said, by the way, well said. Coastal elites.
Yes, the gig economy is terrible to workers overall in some way, but it is a more balanced view than a polemic argument, right? Because so I can take the example of what's happening here in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, it's mostly a service. It's overwhelmingly a service economy. And in that, I think to survive this pandemic, because of the overwhelming, the home delivery is like it's now become pretty much the biggest profession for people over here. So there's people who are out of work, who are actually keeping their households going because of this gig economy, right? And so everyone, Grab as an employer is practically being worshipped right now, because they are the guys who are giving people livelihoods in difficult times, people who have lost jobs because of constant lockdowns and stuff. And Grab is actually one of the better paymasters over here compared to a lot of other industries which are now shut down. And there are a lot of people who have switched to like delivery in some way, where they are actually saying they are probably not going to go back to their older professions because this is much more profitable. It gives them that ability to switch around, because it's incredible right now. Like when I look at it, the way the gig economy is evolving, like there are working there's mothers who have like with smaller children or like kids and all that stuff, who are saying that it's easier to kind of take on a job like being a Grab delivery person because they're literally taking their own car. They have their kids in the back, so they don't need a babysitter. They're just going around making deliveries with their kids. So there's so many times when I order food, there's like little kids coming and giving the food because the moms like go say I don't need to park the car. So the kids are actually going and doing that stuff, and they're actually spending time with their parents all day long. So there are, I think, yes, there are, and this is of course one facet of the gig economy. There are those negative facets as well. But what I'm seeing is, I think as a workforce around the world, people are evolving with the gig economy. To some extent, where they are now finding ways of living with this, and it's,
I have a slightly different take.
Please go ahead. Of course, yeah.
I strongly believe that these big guys need to be constantly hounded and pressured into being fair on their gig economy. Because organizations have a tendency to be mindlessly evil, for no particular reason. There used to be this thing called a Walmart.
There is a reason, right? It's called shareholders.
No, not even shareholders. Like Walmart is notorious for squeezing out every last bit of profit out of the value chain and delivering it to the customer, who really doesn't care if a pair of whatever headphones is available for $1.19 when yesterday it was $1.21. But somebody in Walmart went and kicked ass all the way from Vietnam to Cambodia to take that 2 cents away and give it to the hobo in whatever Wisconsin or wherever he is, because he wanted to buy so you need to make sure that the system is fair. You cannot reduce, you cannot extract money from the pockets of helpless people like gig working economies, like Amazon. Amazon is selling you something for like 99 cents, and you could pay $1. It doesn't matter if it's 99 cents or $1. So Amazon must find some way of giving that guy. At least we should be yelling at Amazon all the time. There needs to be someone. So I'm all for Uber being pressurized. Corporations are mindlessly evil. They are just mindless. The same people who are really nice guys who would be happy to give to charities, everything. Moment they enter their office, moment they get into their thing, they are there to suck that half a cent out of the pockets of some stupid gig worker and pass it on to a consumer who doesn't even care.
Well said, Naren. That's the best 2 cents I've ever heard.
We'll give you 4 cents without using a discount code. But that's why this whole the antitrust discussions in the US are so fascinating right now, because I think it's going to fundamentally change the way companies are looked at. Okay, so for those who are unaware of what this whole thing is, a long time back, there was a nice gentleman called John D. Rockefeller, whose oil operations got so huge. Naren, by the way, was interviewed as a role for that.
That's a very crude joke.
Sorry if I hurt your feelings, Naren. I'll grease your palms right now. No, but finally, the US, to the extent where Rockefeller was one of the richest guys in the world at that point of time, and possibly the richest person ever in history, if you look at it. And the US government at that point said, all right, too much. We are going to break this company down. It's acting as this huge trust, hence antitrust. We broke it down into 16 companies. And ironically enough, the value of those 16 companies actually ended up being even more valuable than one company by itself. And Rockefeller actually, at one point of time, his net worth was 2% of America's GDP, 2% of a country's GDP. And that's a fascinating thing with what's happening right now, because till now, the focus of antitrust has always been, all right, how does a consumer pay the lowest prices? As long as the consumer pays the lowest prices, everything else is fine. It seemed to work okay at a time when there was no internet, but right now, when you take something like a Facebook, or the consumer is actually paying nothing. So what exactly is, how do we regulate? You can't regulate these companies in the same way as they did 30, 40 years back. And this is author I follow called Benedict Evans. I absolutely love his analysis and his take. Anyone who's listening and is a fan of Scott Galloway, just go for Evans as well. He's He thinks brilliantly. And one of the points he made still sticks with me. Like, how do you classify each of these guys? Like, take Facebook. Are they a media company? Are they a social media thing? Are they an advertising platform? And like, how do you regulate them? What do you slot them as? Similarly, all the other guys, like, how do they compete with each other? Yes, Amazon and Facebook compete with each other in some ways, but are they in the same territory? Are they after the same customers? So it's actually a lot of redefinition is going to happen right now. And I think we might fundamentally come back to saying, okay, it's not about the consumers paying the lowest price. It needs to be something else. Now, whether that something else is something like an ESG or something, which BlackRock has been proposing for a while. Don't know. I think that's one of the interesting things that coming out of this whole thing for me. The second thing that I just wanted to say out of this is, while it looks like these big 4, 5, 6, or the entrenched player in each industry is absolutely unmovable. Like, I can't think of another multi-vertical e-commerce platform coming up to challenge either an Amazon in the US or like Southeast Asia, for instance, has their own equivalent, right? Like Lazada and all that in Singapore.
Yeah.
Right? I think didn't Lazada get bought over by Amazon? I don't remember.
No.
Right?
Lazada is.
Yeah. So
Lazada is Malaysia, Singapore leader. There's no Amazon here.
Yeah, like a Gojek in Southeast Asia for a whole bunch of other things. So what's interesting is, while there may not be direct competition to these guys, what's interesting to me is that there are these niches coming up saying that, okay, we don't want the entire market. We are just going to focus on this one small thing, and we're going to do a bloody good job of that. Like music, to me, because there's a space that I follow a lot, that to me is particularly fascinating. Nobody is going to be able to compete with a Spotify, Apple Music and all that for a scale level, right? You guys slug it out. It's you do all that. You do all that. But then on the fringes, if you look, there are some very interesting things that are happening. A company called Bandcamp, for instance, where you can buy music directly from the artists, and it's a little more expensive, but the artists get a huge cut of the money. Now, artists are incentivized, obviously, to put their music up on Bandcamp because they get a lot more money. They'll still make it available everywhere else, obviously, but they get a huge cut of the money. And fans of, like, hardcore fans of some bands like me, for instance, we'll go and make sure we buy it only from a Bandcamp, for instance, knowing that
Alison Hannigan.
Ayo, this one time in Bandcamp.
Oh goodness. I can't believe I did. Oh, this is how old I've become, I guess. So to me, that's the sort of interesting things that are happening. And possibly the biggest anti-big tech brand in some ways is Shopify, in that sense, right? Which came up as a way for people who were not exactly pissed off with Amazon, but wanted to sell to consumers directly. They ended up building a platform. And today, ironically enough, Shopify has become big enough where you can almost say there is a big anti-big tech. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I said. No, like when you start out these things, you're very idealistic. Then suddenly the capitalists take over, and then like
no, I don't think so. I think a lot of these smaller companies, right? I don't think they're in it for the same reasons as I don't see a Bandcamp, for instance, which I just spoke about, ever having ambitions to the scale of a Spotify. They know that, okay, they will grow till here, and they won't compromise on their. I mean, it's as cheesy as it may sound, values in some way.
It's like when Richard Hendricks has to concede the seat to that other CEO, right? Like that will eventually happen.
I don't think that will happen. That's the thing. I don't, because when you look at a company,
no one is that idealistic. I mean, if you are idealistic, you'll probably last like 5 years and then die out.
Yeah, I mean, okay, that's the other. I guess that's the other cynical way of looking at it. But I guess these guys have found out a way where they don't need to compromise. See, the thing is, you compromise on values when you need to grow, right? When you need to, okay, we need to mine our customers' data so that we can go from here to here. I don't think these companies want to go from here to here. They're happy doing this. They're saying, okay, we're getting X amount of money a month, and that's fine, because these guys operate in spaces that for Spotify to say, okay, should we sell high resolution music directly? It's too much of an investment for them, and they'll be like, screw it. That's not a game that we want to get into. It's not going to change things for us too much. So
yeah,
I think
slightly philosophical analogy, right? Like recently, like when all these cricketers and Bollywood stars had to parrot the line of the Indian government, Nasruddin Shah asked a question that you've earned enough for 7 generations. How much more do you want to protect? And like, why don't you speak out against evil or tyranny? Is because you want to protect what you have, right? So, and at the end of the day, it's just one Nasruddin Shah who does it, as opposed to like 100 prominent Bollywood stars and cricketers who do it. And that similar thing plays out, right? Like you may not want to make like $800 trillion or something, but when it comes your way, right, you were suddenly given, I mean, naturally veer towards the basic instinct of wanting to.
But the thing over here, Tony, I think is because each of these companies has built themselves up as being against the big guy. I think the moment they do something, they will get called out. Like
that's bullshit, right? Like, we all like to think of Mark Zuckerberg as like Dr. Evil, but the fact is that like poor guy wanted a way to like mash faces together. Right?
It's like hotness of girls.
Yeah, I think there are just so many ways of sort of looking at this. I'm sure we can like possibly have a 2-hour discussion on this, but hopefully we have given you something to think about. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and this is again because I can't go 30 minutes without mentioning the name Scott Galloway at least once, is he said something that is very interesting. So if you look at the last few years, big tech has been acquiring high NPA industries, like an Amazon, for instance, buying out a lot of Hollywood so that there's a better reason for people to subscribe to Amazon Prime. And hence, basically what he's saying is they're featurizing an entire entertainment industry to sell toilet paper better. Right? Like Spotify is kind of like doing the same thing with podcasts right now. Podcasts are, let's face it, right? It's got a lot of affinity, as in like all three super fans of Simplified, two of which are on the panel right now.
One of them is Elon Musk. One of them is Elon. The other one, hi Elon.
Hey, you'll never walk.
So Spotify suddenly acquired an industry that a lot of people care very deeply about, and I think that's an interesting and maybe slightly cynical way of looking at it. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how, I think revisiting this conversation in 2 years' time will be fascinating. I think there's so much that's going to change where all these guys are. So many things that could go wrong, so many things that could change. But these guys are here for the time being. And if you have stocks, then hodl, as they say.
Hodl away.
Yeah, that's all from me.
And that's a great segue into what I think Tony is going to talk about. Is what is the meaning of this?
But the segue is Chuck feels that in the next 2 years we'll be sitting on like different stock portfolios, and my outlook is completely much bleaker, right? Like, what is the meaning of life and stuff like that. But to be honest, like, I feel like I've got the dress code wrong for this 200th episode. All three of you have covered something that's here and now and probably in the future. I actually thought this is the 200th episode. I don't know how many of you guys did this, like when you were starting out a new term in school or something, you're like, oh, this term I'll study properly.
There's always it. March is coming. No,
scoring area.
Yeah. And by the time the exam comes around, you're like, oh, you will have a proper plan. At least I had a proper timetable and plan, right? Like, I will revise 3 times before the exam. On Monday, I will do this. Tuesday, I will do this. Wednesday, I'll do this. Then 2 days for revision. Then like some mock test and then the exam. But on the final day of the exam, you're like, no, I haven't even covered half the textbooks. So.
I used to make this joke once where, when people start studying for CAT, right, the average number of pages per day they would cover for the first 2 weeks would be astonishingly high, and then they would drop off. Then they say, let's start again. Let's start this process all over again. So as a result of which, if you take the average engineer's CAT prep material, the first 50 pages will be like super used. So I've made this point that actually IMS and Time and all they can like, after page 50, they can just publish blank and nobody would actually That's something I want to know.
Yeah. So, I got slightly ambitious and said, okay, instead of reading a Wikipedia article, let me try to read one full book, although it's a small book. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have read
research
this book.
Anyone's done for.
Yeah, it's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Have you guys read it?
I've read it.
Yeah, see, I mean, I'm going to use this as like a sample size for our audience because obviously like it's privileged men listening to us. So like,
what?
I'm going to assume that 50% of you have not read this book. But what is fascinating is that it's as relevant today as it is when it was written, right? So Viktor Frankl.
Which was when?
Immediately after the World War or something like that.
Okay.
Because Viktor Frankl was this psychologist or psychoanalyst or one of these things who was basically in the concentration camps during World War II, right? And he basically got out of it finally when the war ended. And so, I mean, I'm guessing he's an authority as anyone to speak about man's search for meaning. And my book comes with a preface that is written in 1992 by Viktor Frankl himself, right? And one of the things that he says is that it's a bestseller even in 1992, and that's not like a great thing because he's like, if hundreds of thousands of people reach out for a book whose very title promises to deal with the question of a meaning to life, it must be a question that burns under their fingernails. So not a very happy existence per se, right? So that was basically like how he started to write this book. And his sort of account is in two parts. One is about what is the everyday life in a concentration camp for an average prisoner, right? So like in World War II, there were obviously like Nazis. Then there was something called capos. Naren, is it right?
Yeah.
Basically prisoners who acted as trustees, right? And they were prisoners, but like they also like suddenly became like masters and at least had food to eat and stuff like that. And like there was like a proper
hierarchy.
Hierarchy in place and stuff like that. So what he came up with, obviously he was like well qualified even before he went in there, and he had like his
You are a
life's
collaborator of Sigmund Freud, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. But actually he questions Freud's theories.
No, I mean, he was like, at that level. You're like,
Yeah.
you're a serious psychoanalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, what essentially happened was he went into the concentration camp with his first manuscript, and like all things, he was stripped to the bare bones, including his manuscript, which was thrown into a dustbin of sorts, and everyone was basically stripped naked, shaved to the bare skin, and had a number tattooed on them. So you were basically stripped of all identity, and all you were was a number and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is he came out of this, and he lived till 1997, a full life. And how do you find the man's search for meaning is his basic quest, right? And what he's come up with is something called logotherapy, which Chuck, when we started the episode, was what I told you, that the logo of the mic should be facing you for best audio reception. Actually, it's not that. It is actually that logos in Greek means meaning. Okay.
Oh,
So that's
bios, logos.
Yeah, that's why logotherapy.
I remember from biology. That's what the origin of the name biology means.
Absolutely. So who would have thought, Chuck Sriket, that the best advice in life is, can you make the logo bigger?
Oh, nice.
Well played. Beautiful. Can you make the logo bigger?
Yeah. So what he sort of observed was, like, obviously there are like different phases to what you endure in a concentration camp, from shock to apathy to basically just like pure selfishness, right? And he says like the best of the people in the camps did not survive because they probably gave up their seat for someone else to die, whatever, right? So he admits as much. And essentially his funda was that while there were people who were of different physical statures, like some well-built, some not so well-built, he found that the intellectual ones, or who are probably physically more frail, survived longer than the sturdy ones, right? Which is a little weird. And that's where he came up with the idea that Nietzsche said, that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. So that's the basic funda. And where he largely differs from in terms of what we are taught to chase is that happiness is not relevant. It is meaning that makes more difference. Like, can you find meaning to your life, right? So, and this is even more important in an era like ours, where there is something called the existential vacuum, right? So, for instance, he talks about how, like, on a Sunday evening, most people feel like this void where you're done with the work for the week, and then you basically like watch 2 movies or whatever, and then you dread Mondays again, right? Like
Yeah.
there's this existential vacuum of people not telling you what to do, and you also don't know what to do, and you are wondering what is your purpose on this planet in life and stuff like that. So that is essentially what he's tackling.
When you take this particular scenario, the concepts that you were talking about that existential void and stuff like that, I've been playing with this thought that I read. I read in an article somewhere that human, because of this incessant, we have so many different routes for the quest of happiness, right? Like we're all looking for like, oh, what are the different paths for happiness and all that stuff. But since the beginning of time, since there are so many different paths for happiness and nobody really seems to have achieved it in any real meaningful way, is it that achieving happiness is never really the quest of humans at all? Like it is that the constant suffering is the way to be, because humans will never be happy. I mean, if they find happiness, it will automatically transition itself into unhappiness. It is not going to be.
This sounds like the plot of an evil movie or something, where humans' constant suffering is the fuel that keeps the world going in some ways.
It's like Matrix 3.
It's like a weird combination of Social Dilemma and what's the Jim Carrey movie? The one where he's
Truman Show.
The Truman Show, and a whole bunch of other things together. Wow, that's a bleak way of looking.
In fact, that'd be so awesome. And you have this suffering meter, then there's one part of the world where the suffering is going down, and then the energy levels and the lights are beginning to dim in heaven.
George Carlin had this brilliant set once. I mean, all of his sets were brilliant, but one of the things is that, like, we humans think a little too much of ourselves. What if our only purpose in life was to actually create plastic in the first place? God is like, all right, we've got everything we need. We need plastic. Humans. And then once that's done, all right, let's get rid of these guys. Only us to try to find meaning for our life and all that. I think he actually ends with that. Like, maybe that'll answer the question that we were all been asking. What are we here for? Plastic.
And even again, the most going back to the most profound philosophers of our time, stand-up comedians, which is currently disgraced Louis C.K. in one of his stand-up specials, had said this whole thing that everyone is in a shitty thing, right? You had a thing, you wanted to make it a good thing.
Yeah.
You got to a good thing, and then it became a shitty thing. So everyone is currently in a shitty thing. Like there is nobody who's currently in a good thing. Like there was a thing that was good previously, and everyone is.
There is something called Peter's principle. So Peter's principle is, in every organization, a person rises to his level of incompetence. So if you're competent, you get promoted, and you only stop getting promoted when you're incompetent. So eventually, so same here. If you're happy, you go on to better things. So actually, Viktor Frankl's entire book is that it's how to, about finding meaning even in the most miserable situation. He says that regardless of how miserable the situation is, if you are able to find meaning, then you can live. That's basically, as I remember it.
Absolutely.
In fact, on that thing, the whole "Make America Great Again" phenomenon comes from the question when was America truly great? What is that time that you're trying to get back to? Like this question has been asked so many times. Like, you're like, okay, when there was slavery, America wasn't great. When there was like segregation, America wasn't great. When there was like all of these discrimination against blacks, America wasn't great. America wasn't great now. When was it great?
Basically, before the British came. So there were two completely different things that I thought of when Naren and Sriket was just saying their references, both kind of tangentially connected to what Tony was saying with the larger thing of meaning of life and all that. One, and Sriket, don't throw something at me for saying this, brand purpose.
Can you make the logo bigger?
No. See, so
I'm suddenly reminded that I'm on Zoom.
We joke about this a lot, but I have assiduously been studying brands over the last couple of years, and at least it seems to me that the companies that do well not just from a profit point of view, but just overall have some sense of purpose. And I know that that phrase brand purpose has been thrown about quite a bit, but companies who stick to what they believed in tend to be the ones that sort of do well. And that kind of goes back to the point that you were making, right? Which is, try to find some meaning in life or, whatever. But I won't elaborate on that too much because
but
before
on
10
that
a.m.
point, you're very right, Chuck, because the thing is brand purpose gained prominence because of those companies that did it well.
Yeah.
And then got screwed up by all those idiots who tried to do it half-assed, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why it's become this parody of itself.
Yeah.
But,
I always
but brand purpose in its essence was that what is the true meaning of why you exist? Raison d'etre. Why did you exist?
Yeah.
Right.
I always like a short heuristic for me for whether brands really mean brand purpose, and I guess that can be extended to humans as well with respect to values, is are you willing to sacrifice money in order to stand up for your values? Like if you really say that you are pro environment, for instance, like, okay, are you
Nike with Colin Kaepernick thing?
Yeah, exactly.
They were I'm okay with people burning the Nikes. I want you to do that. I want you to stop buying my product if you support this cause.
Yeah. How did we segue from philosophy to
Sorry, just to
the
come
second
back
thing,
to
the second thing I wanted to say, which is kind of connected to this, is, I mean, just to turn the upliftment meter up a notch a little bit. When I started freelancing, right, like I just ended up doing a whole bunch of things, and to some extent I'm still doing that. But I used to read a lot of stuff that other freelancers would write, advice and just things like that. And one of the most profound piece of advice that I read somewhere was aim to make yourself useful, because from there everything else will be derived. If you try to do something like aiming for happiness or one of those broad things, it doesn't end up getting you anywhere. So aim for usefulness, and then everything else will kind of work as well. That's a very nice way of kind of looking at it. Still haven't translated that down yet. I think it goes back to what you were saying, right? Everyone has their own internal direction, I guess, and the sooner you figure that out, the better it is. I'm realizing as I age that many of these things that we would laugh at as kids, like, oh, find purpose in life, that actually makes sense. It's something I've realized.
Yeah, so just to get back to Frankel, right, and not disparaging your freelance experience, one of the profound things he said was that obviously the best of us didn't survive, and pure statistically, right, because you've been reduced to numbers, you had a 1 in 28 chance of making it out alive from which is like a fairly bleak odd, right? But he made it out, and he doesn't leave it abstract. He's not saying don't chase happiness, everything is misery. He actually makes a very interesting distinction, is that chasing happiness is like asking someone to laugh. There needs to be a reason for you to laugh, which is the joke itself, right? So the laughter is an after effect of telling the joke. So in what that translates to is that you shouldn't, happiness is not great. He's saying that once you, figure out that meaning, happiness is something that ensues. So instead of saying, say cheese and making someone laugh, it's much easier and nicer and natural if that laughter comes as a result of telling a joke or something like that.
More than disparaging what I said, I think you just added on to it beautifully.
Yeah. So he actually defines 3 things, and this is very easy to follow, right? And I can't say this enough times, but one of the greatest things for me to come out of Simplified was exactly 1 year ago when Naren spoke about Stoicism. And in some senses, it is related to Frankel's theory is related to Stoicism, right? So before I go to the 3 things, he basically says trying to find a universal meaning doesn't make sense, right? What is your purpose in life? It's probably to turn into plastic. That doesn't matter. But asking that question is same as asking a chess grandmaster like Naren, what is the best move in chess, right? And he's saying that there is no best move in chess. It's dependent on the situation that you're put in. And you have to solve the problem for yourself by finding the best move in that given situation, right? So broadly, he says there are 3 ways to find meaning in life. One is by something you do, which is, some meaningful work. If you find meaning in work and there are enough people who do, they have a happy or a meaningful life. And where this peters out in the Peter principle thing is when a lot of people who place their entire existence on work retire, right? And suddenly you find that they were healthy and at their prime, and suddenly they just taper off and become a shell of what they were previously. So while that is one way, the other way is basically love. and we've all experienced this when you like are, infatuated with someone or something, you find the best in them and also find your best because of them, right? So work, love, and this is something that kept him going during the concentration camp. Like I said, his manuscript, the first manuscript was taken away from him the first day he came in, and he was like, okay, I have to go back and finish this book, right? That was one thing he found meaning in. The second was his newly married wife, right? And he had no means of communicating with her, but on like every routine day, he would imagine conversations with her, and that kept him going. And the third is suffering in itself. And not that suffering is great, but your attitude towards suffering or the courage to stand up in the face of suffering gives you meaning. So he's saying that you don't seek out suffering, because that's masochistic, not heroic. But if you encounter such a suffering and you're able to put a courageous stand to it, where sort of stoicism also comes in, and it's a philosophy towards action and responsibility on your side, then you'll find meaning. So very three simple things, which I found was like really profound and a very good way of looking at what can you chase instead of happiness, chase meaning.
Wow, well said.
It is truly a life-changing book. I strongly recommend everyone read it. And, it gives a lot of meaning to it. So,
As you were talking, by the way, Tony, you're an aside, something about your light changed and suddenly looked like you had a halo. Suddenly, profound meaning came.
Those of you who are listening to this can't see this, but when Tony went from that moment of bleakness to, there is still some light out there, suddenly, I don't know, the light must have come.
I didn't chase the halo, it just ensued, right? So that's...
Tony, are you actually like I've always wondered, are you
lockdown does funny things to people, right? Like Srikeet got into stocks and all.
My question was larger than that. I don't want to say the name, but have you been sent from above? And I don't mean like the 13th floor. Like, have you?
Your love is what keeps me going. By the way,
this reminds me of that old Reader's Digest joke about some dude.
You don't need to say old. You don't need to say old.
Reader's Digest joke. Some dude goes to a doctor with a headache, and he's like, doc, headache, and he's like, okay, have you been drinking a lot? He's like, no. Smoking a lot? No. Lots of women? No. Then he examines him for a bit longer, and he's like, found your problem. What? Your halo is too tight. Your halo is too tight.
So loosen up a little bit is what I'm saying. Tony, that was beautiful, man. I actually thought that was... we've done many profundities, but that might actually be the most profound.
Among the most profound.
on 200 episodes of Simplified. So maybe it's good to introspect once in a while, even on this show. So group therapy. And one last thing. It's interesting, Tony, that you said exactly 1 year ago that you did that show with Naren on Stoicism, because exactly 1 year and 5 days ago, or 1 year and 1 week ago, Naren and I recorded our IVM for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And today, I'd like to say to you guys live that I'm actually back on Simplified.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And not just for this episode.
Not just for this episode, but for ever. So Tony and I have been plotting this. So Srikeet, I'm assuming you'll be back as well now.
Definitely. I can't not be back then. There is no way.
The gang back, as it was. No, because I've been I after 175, I just needed a bit of a break. I think I've got that break. In any case, another certain project that Tony and I were doing before we have decided to retire it, because I think let's just say that we have creative differences, and we have decided to call it that a day. And so I am glad to be back on Simplified.
Similarly, I'll also I didn't have a declared hiatus, but I did have a self-imposed one, work plus a lot of other stuff going on. But with the gang back, there is no way I'm not.
Let's go. The Fab Four back. This will be just
the Fab Four. Let's all do this again. And this was among the most fun I've had in months So
Yes.
there's no way I don't want to continue this. So let's just start it all over again.
Yes, quickly. Stay safe, stay meaningful, and stay simplified.
Ah.
And stay with us. And see you
Bye.
next week. Have fun.
Or stay
Bye.
big tech.
Stay
Just bring it back to earth a little bit. Bye, everybody, and
Bye,
we
guys.
will see you again soon.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Siet Tires and The Whole Truth Foods. We really appreciate your support. So, on Cyrus Says, Sagarika Ghosh, journalist, columnist, author, discusses books she has written, her experiences from reporting about the Babri Masjid demolition back in the day, and the upcoming state election. Cyrus also had a great episode with Devdutt Patnaik last week. Do check that out. Chuck narrates an interesting story about a company that shared its virtual expertise with other companies and empowered the virtual world. No, we're not going to tell you what the brand is, but go check out The Origin of Things. And Chuck also came back on Simplified this week from episode 200 onwards. He's back. Go check that out if you haven't had a chance to do so far. The Habit Coach Ashton was joined by Sapna Gopalkrishnan, his co-trekker on Mount Kilimanjaro. They recollect the trek's memories, and Sapna talks about the challenges she faced. On All Things Policy, Rachit Sheth talks to Sarthak Pradhan about Delhi's water crisis. This is due to the pollution of his major water source, the River Yamuna, and he discusses the case against the state of Haryana. We had Manish Dangi, Chief Investment Officer of the Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund, on Paisa Vaisa with Anupam Gupta. They discussed India's financial report card with reference to the past decade, the hits and misses, and what the future of investing is going to look like. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear friends. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. Life, as you know, is a journey. And you and I, travelers, how can we celebrate this travel? I have a podcast for you, Begin the Journey. I share stories and moments from my life. Do tune in every Monday and Thursday to listen to my podcast on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from. Cheers.